So I'd like to welcome everyone formally to our webinar, which is how the technology can improve the contact center. Just get the slides up here. And delighted to welcome back two regular and very popular speakers on our webinar program. I'd like to welcome back Dr. Nicola Millard from BT. Thank you for joining us again, Nicola. I know you've been difficult for us to track down, but we're delighted to get a slot in your diary, because I know you're very popular with our audience. So welcome back, Nicola.
Thank you very much.
Indeed, and also delighted to welcome back Mike Murphy from Genesis, who's attended a good number of webinars with us. We're doing an outside broadcast today, so it's been nice to be back with you, Mike.
Indeed, thank you, John T. It's good to be here, and welcome to Frimley.
Thank you very much. There is a replay available later on today, callcenterhelper.com/recorded webinars. If you're not already logged into our chat room, it's a great place to ask questions. Is callcenterhelper.com/chat. There is the details there. It is in a different window from the webinar. Unfortunately, the webinar software is not open enough for us to be able to integrate into, so it is freestanding. And you can download the slides from within there, which is an added advantage. I know, Nicola, you've got quite a lot of detail as ever in your slides, so if you want to see that detail, downloading that is probably the best way to do it. There is an added advantage for being in the chat room, is that we have a bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates for the best tip. We ship normally a bottle of champagne off most weeks. So if you prefer chocolates or even an Amazon voucher if you're in a difficult country to get to, we can certainly ship that out to you. So if you could use hashtag question for a question, hashtag tip for a tip, would be great to get going. And we've been asking the question in the chat room, what has been the best technology that you've deployed in your contact center? So far, we've had answers from multi-contact handling, data analytics, chatbots, customer satisfaction survey, quality assessment, cloud-based technology, cloud-based CRM. So quite a range of different ones. If you'd like to put into the chat room what has been your best technology you've deployed. And I'd just like to put up a poll, since we're looking at technology, and I'd like to ask the question of you, what is the next technology that you're going to be integrated into your contact center? So is it, for instance, cloud technology? Is it new channels, for instance, web chat, video? Is it something like a knowledge base? Is it workforce management? Or if there's any other channels, if you'd like to put those into the chat room. Mike, any ideas from your perspective what you think will come up high?
Yeah, I think, so there's one which is quite interesting for me, which is co-browsing. I'm not sure where that's going to appear. I'm curious about it. It's something which we're getting a bit of traction on with our customers. And it's a different way of engaging with the customer. So I'm curious about that, if that will appear in the chat room.
Okay, well, let's have a look and put the answers up on the screen. And Nicola, it looks like new channels is probably the most common answer that we've got here. 43% are going to introduce new channels. So I'm guessing for a lot of people that will probably be web chat or video or social. Behind that is cloud technology. I know, Mike, you're a big proponent of cloud technology.
What's that?
There's knowledge base, still very popular, 17%, and workforce management behind. Other answers we've got include analytics, which is, we could only put 5 options on here. So, Nicola, any surprises there?
No, and I think web chat, certainly our new, what we used to call autonomous customer research, which we now call digital customer, is showing that amongst customers we're getting 20% growth in the appetite for web chat. So I think there's a pull-pull situation here. I think contact centers like it, but I think the customers like it just as much, if not more. And obviously the economics of it tend to work quite well as well. So it's not a surprise that in particular, I think chat is one of those critical channels and one of the few growth channels actually in the contact center.
Yeah, so I think chat is certainly very popular from a user perspective, particularly in the younger generations. Also, if you sat on a train, find that chat is much more convenient than sharing your woes of your problems so with technology or whatever is fitting with the rest of the carriage as well as your password as well. So I think that's probably a good point now to pass the baton across to Nicola, and hopefully if I can get the right button pressed here. Nicola, if you can share us with some of the ideas of ways that you think technology is going to transform the contact center.
No problem. Just sharing my screen now. Hopefully at some point.
That's right. We can see it. Fine.
Good. What I'm going to talk about today is probably the most hyped piece of technology in the contact center at the moment, which is the rise of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and the bots. So I've actually just published some research that we've called Botman versus Super Agents. Originally, it was going to be called Dawn of a New Contact Center, but we decided maybe there were too many superhero film references there, so we backed off a little bit. But there does seem to be a lot of hype, well, generally, not just about contact centers, in terms of what's machine learning going to do, and certainly the press tends to be obsessing about the fact that robots are going to eat all of our jobs, I mean, I started my career in BT many years ago, scarily actually 27 years ago. My first project in BT was actually implementing machine learning for contact centers.
Hi, we can see your side panel at the moment, so we can't fully see all your slides. Do you want to press the orange arrow?
I beg your pardon? The orange arrow. Let's see what I can do. Here we go. Oh, that's moved it. Oh, there we go. Got it. Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay. Not good with technology, So my first job in BT was around designing neural networks for contact centers. So it's really interesting that we kind of forgot all about machine learning for a long time, and then it's back in vogue. And I think the interesting thing is that after 27 years, there is a lot that's changed, but there's a lot that remains the same. So in the press, they've been having a field day. Sort of robots are going to eat all of the jobs. And of course, the most quoted research is actually the Oxford Martin research, which stated that 47% of jobs, scarily, are at risk of being automated in the next 10 years. Now, I have to say, I'm not entirely sure about this research, because I think in my experiences, most jobs are a complex jigsaw puzzle of pieces. Some of those pieces are absolutely automatable, and others really are not so much. So looking at other research around there, as I tend to, I actually have I think the stuff being done by McKinsey and the OECD, that's really hard to say, it's slightly more, it's a slightly interesting, different take on it, which acknowledges that jobs are those jigsaw pieces. So actually, they've come to the conclusion that between 5 and 9% of jobs will be automated in the next 10 years, but 60% of our jobs could have about 30% of the activities automated. And sometimes that's not bad, to be honest. I mean, I keep saying I really like a bot to do my email because I'm terrible at it. So it tends to be the activities that we're not necessarily so good at. I call them the dull, the dirty, and the dangerous, that are likely to be automated into the future. We also need to think about, and again, this is some really old research by a roboticist called Hans Moravec. Moravec came up with something he called Moravec's Paradox, which is basically saying that there are certain activities that we think are really complex, like playing chess, that actually a machine finds quite easy to do. And games, certainly, if you look at the progress that Google, for example, are making in machine learning, games are one of the ones where really you can apply some very clever machine learning, because typically games are rules-based, even really complex ones like Go. And obviously they've done some fantastic stuff around AlphaGo. So that looks really complex to us, but actually a machine can find it quite easy, because it is often rules-based and data-rich. But there's a lot of things that we think are really simple, that a 3-year-old can do, that actually machines find quite difficult. And everything from walking, if you look at some of the DARPA robots walking, that can be very funny, manual dexterity, but other things that we're probably are more central to the contact center, things like empathy, gut feeling, and things like conversation. I would suggest conversation is very central to what we do in the contact center realm. And conversation is a bit weird. I mean, it's certainly rules-based, but language was largely invented for us to talk to each other. So there's a lot of redundancy in it. It's kind of anarchic sometimes. I mean, Alan Turing proposed the Turing test back in the 1930s, and nothing has passed the Turing test. So the Turing test, for those of you who do not know, is if you are talking to a machine or a human, and you can't tell whether it's a machine or a human, it's passed the test. Nothing has. So actually, our bots are not particularly good conversationists. Certainly, I've yet to have a particularly good conversation with either Siri or Cortana. So that kind of thing, our agents are probably better at doing than the bots. Negotiation's an interesting one. That's social and emotional. And although it's rules-driven, that give and take piece can be very hard to quantify and codify into a machine form. And things like creativity and innovation as well. Although there are machines that write music, I would suggest that we're probably better at that than a machine is, certainly for the moment. I think the other thing to discuss, particularly in our area, is the value that the role brings to the brand. And there's some wonderful stuff being done by a Greek academic called George Zarkadakis. I've spent a long time learning how to pronounce his name, so I try and pronounce it as much as possible. George Zarkadakis. And he's looked at a slightly different view of, if you're going to automate things or automate roles, what roles are more likely to be automated than others? He uses actually the example of an airline. Which is most likely to be automated, the pilots or the cabin crew? Now, the pilot, interestingly enough, we do like pilots on planes, but mostly planes fly themselves. So what's the role of the pilot? Now, largely they're the fail-safe mechanism. So we want our pilot to be able to fly a plane really, really well. But teaching a pilot to juggle, for example, would add very little value to the brand. So as long as they've got competence in flying a plane, and that can be a problem if they forget how to fly a plane, which is one of the problems at the moment, because autopilot is probably in control about 90% of the time on most flights. So we've got to try and make sure their skills are, they're proficient at their job, but actually training them does not actually add significant brand value to do other things like loop the loops, for example. So that's the role that probably is going to get automated versus the cabin crew. Now, yes, they are governed by rules and procedures, but they also have to deal with us. And frankly, we're the unexpected part of the value chain, if you like. So they can deal with uncertainty. They can be empathetic, and actually, they are the face of the brand. Certainly, when I'm getting on an airline, they're the first people I see these days, because I've done self-service all the way through. The first people I see that represent the brand are the cabin crew. So we can automate some of their things, but actually, hopefully that frees up their time to add significant brand value to the customer. So I think when we look at contact center jobs, we can see that maybe telemarketing, actually in the Oxford Martin study, telemarketing jobs came out as #1 most likely to be automated. But they only said 55% of customer service advisor jobs. Bearing in mind, I don't entirely agree with that research, because it's about jobs rather than tasks. But even they think that customer service has a huge amount of brand value. So that's the good news. I think also, I mean, in the industry as a whole, we've been at the forefront of technology for a very long time, and that certainly has been led by things like self-service. And machine learning and self-service has gone together very well for many years. It's just we don't know it's machine learning. So, for example, Amazon, machine learning. Google, machine learning. Netflix, machine learning. I have taught them everything I know about me, and I'm not freaked out about that. In actual fact, as a customer, generally it makes it easier for me. It curates choice. It learns about me. It personalizes the interface for me and makes my life easier, and I like that. I'm not freaked out by it. Is it replacing jobs? No, probably not. In fact, the evidence in the contact center industry is that we can start to see a shift in the kind of calls that we get. But if we look at customer preferences, certainly if we look at how we use self-service technology, for example, we can start to create a much more personalized, maybe a proactive way of working with customers. So actually alerting them to things that they want to know before they have to think about it. And then the slightly creepy bit is predictive as well. So This starts and ends with data, and to be honest, again, machine learning starts and ends with data. That hasn't changed in 27 years, and actually the reason why we didn't really get it right 27 years ago when I was working on neural networks is we didn't have the data. But we are certainly getting customers saying, I'm willing to actually share more data with companies. In return for something, I want a more personalized, proactive, or predictive service. I call this the me economy because this is very much about me. So what am I willing to share with you? Is it my location? Is it my social media data? This is actually, these are figures from our new digital customer research, and really interestingly, we do this every other year. 2 years ago, people weren't that keen on sharing, and I think we got used to it, and we got used to some of the benefits from the sort of Amazon, Netflix examples. It does sometimes get a bit creepy though, so if the data is then telling us things that we didn't know, that we, you know, I think in retail space especially, they have already got quite creepy. They know a lot about us, and therefore they're starting to suggest things that we really didn't know about ourselves. That's the point at which it becomes a little bit creepier. And I think, interestingly, we look at things like GDPR, the new regulation coming in Europe, we're going to have to get customers to agree to share their data now. And so we're going to have to, well, firstly figure out what data do we need that will be useful, and then we've got to convince the customer to consent to give their data. Now, the reason I brought this in is, well, firstly, you know, we need the data. So if customers withdraw their consent, machine learning will not magic that data up, and it does rely on data. So that's really one of the key messages. Data is everything here, because machine learning will not work without it. But actually, one of the really interesting things around self-service especially is it hasn't replaced the contact center. I think a lot of early business cases were saying, well, you don't need a contact center anymore. Customers will solve things themselves. This is actually some research we did back in 2014 about the contact center of 2020. And we asked the CCMA in the UK and Ireland, what do you think the contact center will be doing in 2020? And they answered, well, complex stuff. And we're already seeing this transition because the more tools that we give to the customer, the more intelligence we give to the customer as well, they will solve the simple stuff themselves. That doesn't make us redundant. It actually means that we get the really complex and emotive stuff. So we're seeing in some areas, certainly financial services I work a lot in, call volumes are going down, but actually average handle times are going up. Because we're getting the complex stuff that isn't, you know, it doesn't take 2 minutes to fix anymore. It takes 20, 25 sometimes. I think that's really positive. I do think the proactive piece is important as well, because if we've got the data, we can start to become more proactive with customers. So we can manage the demand rather than the demand managing us, again, if we have
I think some
data.
Important stuff here, Nicola, as well on that last slide, is that if everything's getting much more complex, I think we need to be a bit clever about where we deploy artificial intelligence, because certainly for the inbound transactional, that's the perfect place for it. With the complex problem solving, maybe it's not customer facing, but perhaps more advisor facing, and that you drive the advisor with the sort of information you think might be the next most useful thing. So it's not necessarily thinking about, we'll put in a chatbot and we can, you know, take 20% of calls out. It's looking at, you know, what is the better role of that.
And I think that's, I mean, the quote from Harvard Business Review I put down there as well. I think one of the problems we've had strategically is people are putting automation in and then under-investing in the sort of traditional contact center. Particularly the phone, I think, is one very big channel that has not been invested in quite so much because it's not new and it's not sexy, but actually customers are still using it, and it's very good for complex and emotive stuff. So absolutely, I mean, I think it does shift a lot of things to the agent. But to that point, we're also, I mean, we've got the omnichannel phenomenon. Everyone rolls their eyes when I say the word omnichannel. It is a bit of an overused word, but when we look at growth channels, I mentioned earlier, chat is a huge growth channel, and customers like it, organizations like it. So we're seeing 20% growth in our digital customer survey compared to 2 years ago with chat. But of course, that then brings us on to chatbots, because from chat to chatbots, it makes sense. So I think they have appeal to customers. I think we're in a honeymoon period at the moment. Again, from this data, 73% of customers are thinking that chatbots will actually help companies improve their customer service. And a lot of that is around the instantaneous response piece. But they're also saying, you know, for the simple stuff, brilliant, but actually we also want it human involvement. There's kind of a parallel with IVR here, actually, in the way that that evolved. In that, you know, the IVRs that trapped you in an endless loop where you couldn't get through to an agent was very frustrating. And I think it's the same with the bot. How do we make sure that there's a seamless experience, that the bot does the triage, and then if it can't solve the problem, how does it then pass people to a real agent? Then, absolutely, as John, you said, Johnsy, earlier, you know, what is it appropriate for? I have been working a little bit with a few companies now, both in financial services and government, around putting bots in. And they are good for the known knowns. If you've already got the data, as I said, it doesn't magic data. It is garbage in, garbage out. If your data's rubbish, the bot will be rubbish. So a lot of the questions I've been asking up front is, well, what data do you have? Because otherwise you're going to have to re-engineer your data, and the business case doesn't stack up at that point unless you're really willing to go through the pain. It's also not really good at things like complaints, all really complex stuff, and complaints, especially those of you who deal with complaints will know that they're often quite long, and if we're going to pass that into machine language, that can be complex. The other thing is that certainly in the UK, in Ireland, probably Australia, we do tend to get sarcasm deployed as well, and sarcasm and algorithms do not go together terribly well. So I've got a couple of examples here. Thank you to a particular train company for my free sauna this morning. That came out as positive in a sentiment analysis engine because, frankly, why would a bot know that having a sauna on a train is a bad thing? We have to teach it that. Even more subtle, it was so good to see your maintenance department hadn't spoiled things by making unnecessary repairs. Again, comes out positive in a sentiment analysis engine because that is just very subtle sarcasm. Are we going to crack sarcasm? I don't know. There are some academic projects on machine learning and sarcasm, but good luck to them. The other thing is around emotion, and we are starting to get the emotional context brought in. Context is always a problem and has been for many years with machine learning. But can we start to read emotions? And obviously we can do that. Vocal pattern stress analysis. We can look at people's faces and start to tell, you know, from micro expressions whether they're angry, and that could fuel the machine learning engine as well. Again, what does it do about it? Empathy is not a very good thing with machines. So how do we teach it empathy? So I keep saying, you know, you need to ask a few questions. So what are your customers asking you? What are the high-impact, low-value questions, or low-complexity, high-value stuff that you could potentially put to a bot? What's appropriate? What data do you have? And also, what outcome do you want? Because it might not be all about saving money. It might be better NPS or CSAT, or simply freeing up your agents to do the complex stuff that they are probably better at doing. So who will be in the contact center? Well, these are some scenarios and personas that we came up for the paper. I think there was also some very lovely stuff in the slow management review last week that said that actually our roles as humans in machine learning age will be as trainers, explainers, and sustainers. And I think all of these roles will have those elements to them. In other words, we use our agents to train the bots. We use our agents to understand how the bots got to the answers that they got to, given that machine learning is often a black box. And actually, depressingly, most of the projects I'm working on aren't really machine learning. They're decision trees. So it takes a brave person to put a black box machine learning system in a regulated environment for a start. But we will need people to look back at that data and say, how did the machine come to that conclusion? And then sustainers are looking at the ethicality of it, which is really around, is it biased? Because it's our data. We are biased. How do we make sure it's learning from the right data? I guess that's responsible parenting. But within that, we've got, you know, advisors that we call it Sally, the Swiss Army knife, who's picking up where the machine has failed or the machine passes across because simply Sally has the better skills to solve the customer's problems. Paula's tackling, she's the troubleshooter. She's tackling the really complex problems. Natalie is the negotiator, probably our high-level escalations team at the moment, but she's taking on that complex social and emotional negotiation. The machine is very difficult finds very difficult to do. Tony's your techie. Techies often operate on gut feeling. I did a lot in the 90s around fault diagnostics. You interview a very, very experienced engineer and say, how did you come to that conclusion? Often, at some point, they just go, gut feeling, seen it before. Difficult knowledge to codify, so let's make sure that our techies, and I'm not just talking technical techies here, but people with a lot of experience are in on the loop. And then inevitably we have Chris, who's a crowdsourced advisor, just to bring in the gig economy as well, because these are possibly people with knowledge in their heads because they're customers, and they're very useful actually getting customers to help other customers, as we know with quite a few models out there. So I think the contact center's future is quite an interesting one. It's not about botman versus super agent. It's botman plus super agents, because I mean, I hate the word artificial intelligence. I think it should be called augmented intelligence. We have things that we do far better than machines and vice versa. And I think the trick is to try and harness the power of both. And just to leave you with a quick story about Gary Kasparov. Now, Gary Kasparov I met about a year ago. Of course, he was the guy that was the world chess champion that got beaten by a machine. And he could have just run off to his hotel room and never come out again. But what he did was invent a new type of chess called advanced chess. And that is basically a man and a machine playing a man and a machine. And the good news is you don't have to be a grandmaster to be good at advanced chess. You just need to be good at working with a machine. So I think, actually, if we look at the customer service piece, it makes a huge amount of sense to ally the skills of our agents with the skills of the machines to create advanced customer experience. So I think we've got an interesting future as we go ahead. That's pretty much all I'm going to say, because I know I've pretty much filled up the time I had allocated. So I'm going to pass back to Jonty.
Thank you very much for that, Nicola. I think that's very interesting. It'd be quite fascinating to see a person with a computer playing another person with a computer. In fact, you wonder if you could put the computers against each other, how quickly they make their moves, or whether it's instantaneous or they've got to think about it for a couple of hours before they come back. So that'd be fun. Have you ever seen any of those games happening?
I haven't, but I feel compelled to these days. That was fast. I knew nothing about that, but I think that's. In fact, Gary Kasparov's has written a lot of very interesting stuff about his learnings with AI as a result of simply interacting with it. But yeah, advanced chess sounds fascinating.
That's fascinating to know, and I didn't know that you started off your career on neural networks. I've been doing a lot of research on those recently, and certainly the one thing that strikes me is they are very data intensive. They need a lot of training over quite a long period of time. So, and the contact center does have a lot of volume running through it, so it could essentially work well. So that ties into our next poll, though I think the question I may need to adjust slightly, which is when will artificial intelligence reach your contact center? So I guess probably in light of Nicola's last comment is when would augmented intelligence reach your contact center? So has it already? Is it likely to be the next 6 months, the next 12 months, the next 5 years, or 5 years plus? Or do you think it will never reach the contact center? So if you'd just like to vote on that, when will artificial or intelligence or augmented intelligence reach your contact center? So I think this is going to be quite fascinating. Nicola, do you have a thought?
I think with a lot of people are already experimenting with it. So I suspect, most people seem to have it on their agenda for the next year, but it'll be interesting to see what people say.
Well, let's have a look. So 17% of people already have it. So much more than I thought. I haven't seen a great deal. So if you have been experimenting with it, perhaps if you'd like to leave your thoughts in the chat room, would be great to see. 6% in the next 6 months, 14% in the next 12 months. I think most people see it's going to happen in the next 5 years.
I'm not seeing that.
And only 9% are never. So the results are, hopefully you can see this up on the screen.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's quite a range there. Mike, only 9% are saying it will never.
Have you made me present it?
Come through? Not yet.
Okay.
So
forgive me.
Only 9% are saying it won't come through, and the vast majority is saying probably within the next 5 years. But I think quite encouraging. 17% are already experimenting.
Oh yes, there's plenty of applications out there using it, and we actually have a couple of customers who have gone into production mode with some examples. It's interesting where the technology is being deployed. Sometimes it's about consolidating their information into something smarter. That's not necessarily customer facing. That's been an interesting example I've seen. But we have got a case where we have got a consumer-friendly case study, which is actually happening in Malaysia, and that's kind of working quite nicely. So,
excellent.
Interesting example.
So let's have a look at a couple of tips. Lee says join various groups such as Call Center Helper, which I guess you're already here, or the Institute of Customer Services to widen your net of for the best practice. We've got an opinion who says by Peter. Says, I've been in the IT industry for 17 years, and way back at university, I discovered AI and machine learning. My first job in BT, sounds a bit similar to you, Nicola, there. It was developing robots, the job of a desk-based agent.
Oh, my God.
I don't see much change in principle, just the buzzwords being used today, and the technology is more advanced. I guess processing power, Nicola, is probably the big change that's probably happened now.
Yeah, it's processing power and data. I think those are the two big things that have developed quite a long way since we were playing with it in BT 17 years ago, 25 years ago. I know we've been working with machine learning for a while.
So we've got a question from Kevin. When working with web chat, how easy is it to conform to regulations such as the Financial Conduct Authority when discussing sensitive data such as financial statements? So I guess, Mike, there's the same need to go through security,
absolutely,
but through web chat.
Yeah, and so often it's kind of where do you land the web chat? Is it kind of behind the sort of the ID and V stage of your website? And if you kind of bring the invitation for a chat after that stage, then you know that sort of customer is ID'd and V'd. So there's some different sort of ways to work it in that context. The other point of view then as well is that this is changing. So like Nicola referred to the GDPR sort of standards which are coming through next year. That's going to, again, kind of change the way we handle our data. And also the comment that Nicola made about, what data do you want to hold as a supplier becomes a really critical sort of question, because you're kind of obliged now in the new rules to be responsible for that. That can become quite a lot of heavy lifting for a brand. So it's an interesting sort of question, really, and it's got emerging consequences, I think, over the next month.
And I guess, Kevin, if you're concerned about the Financial Conduct Authority, probably what a lot of people are doing is putting the web chat, distinguishing the web chat from open customer facing to ones that have already been validated, i.e. they're already in a secure environment, in which case then that security has been done.
Validated, yeah.
And then the only question then is what is seen on the screen being able to be cut and pasted or written down, which is the other side of the regulations. So it'd be interesting to see if anyone else has any other details on that. We've got a tip in from Aaron who says, there's no harm in technology developing to give the customer a better experience. In my opinion, technology will never fully take over, as customers will always prefer speaking to a person as opposed to a robot or IVR. I think it's about ensuring that your contact center evolves with technology, i.e. quality assessment, use cloud-based tools to measure performance of an agent to constantly improve performance, and customer experience. Gone the days of counting calls and measuring talk time. I think, Nicola, that sort of summarizes some of the thoughts you've been talking through.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always thought counting calls and measuring talk time was a bit pointless, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that we're getting around particularly the advantage on bots is simply customers are becoming quite patient. So in terms of talking to an agent, I mean, one of the reasons why people like chat is that they think it's quicker. I think the evidence is it probably isn't, but actually the perception, time is a perception thing more than a reality. So I think it's about weighing up the wait time versus the access to the information and data that customers want, because they want quick, and we've got that challenge. Particularly through the phone channel, around getting not just a quick answer, but also an appropriate answer with a knowledgeable agent. So yeah,
and I think
I agree that we're probably unlikely to automate everything out.
And I think one of the other things with artificial intelligence not to forget is that actually the other place for it is before the contact. So if people are browsing the site, looking through your support pages, that's very data rich. You can be giving them access to the next frequently asked question or something associated with that, or giving them other information rather than just the menu structure is the same for everyone. So there is capability to change that. He says, look for solutions outside of your industry. I work in transport. We don't look at other operators or other transport bodies are doing. We found the best solutions are in other areas such as banking or retail. I know, Mike, you work across a lot of sectors and
yeah, indeed, it's
different best practice.
And you can certainly see how people leverage from other people's experience and skills, and that's a very good example. And I think it's a healthy thing to do, just to kind of keep your kind of options open. And again, often if you come across things, even in your private life, if you will, and one of the ones I liked was that sort of visual IVR tool. So I'm kind of doing my IVR on my smartphone. Excuse me. But I found that really, like, that was a wow effect for me, you know, like, and I'm thinking this can be used in so many different areas. So absolutely, it's a good suggestion.
Condition. Well, now's probably the good chance to pass across to Mike and share some of his thoughts on how technology can help the contact center to improve. So if we'd like to get your slides up here, and if you'd like to take us through your thoughts.
Thank you, Jose. And a great platform from me, Nicholas. So thank you for your remarks. It's really complimentary, I hope, to my comments. So what I've prepared here is kind of a slightly different to what I've done before, Jonty. Some of the things that we're suggesting, I'm putting it in the context of the consumer, really, and I'm kind of running the reason versus how, kind of in parallel in my mind anyway. So let's see how this goes. So this is your customer. She's visited your website and she's looking to solve an issue. And so far she has chatted with your employees, waited patiently, and now she's starting to tweet. And we recognize this. We kind of do this ourselves every single day. Ultimately, this customer has one question. She just wants one thing fixed, but why does it take 3 people up to 4 hours over multiple channels to support that simple question? And again, I think as consumers, we recognize this in the various brands that we use in our lives. And our sort of teaching, the mantra, if you like, in customer service has always been that the customer is king. So in this scenario, she should be our queen. And in the age of the consumer, which is where we are, the consumer actually has power now, and they're realizing that power, how the consumer is engaging, how they buy, how they discover. And from that perspective, the consumer really is changing how they talk about you as a brand provider. And that becomes very, very interesting and very, very challenging sometimes. And certainly in the contact center, it becomes a great opportunity. And if we kind of back this up then by some data, three different providers with the other data, Forrester, Dimension Data, and Gartner. The comment from Forrester really is quite interesting. 73% of the data is left unused by companies for business insights and decision making, and that's quite an alarming amount of kind of untapped opportunity. And Nicola kind of touched on it earlier. But surely if we could access that kind of information, or just a bit more of that information, there could be some tremendous results for the brand itself in providing a service, but also then in delivering an amazingly better service to the customer.
But certainly the contact center is very data intensive in terms of the amount of information we collect. Every call has got records on it. Every conversation is recorded in the system. With speech analytics, you can record all the words. There's a great deal of data, and a lot of it just doesn't get used. And
often, historically, our contact centers are typically run by lots and lots of disparate platforms. You've heard me mention that many, many times over the years we've been doing these webinars, Jonty. And when you have lots of disparate platforms, there's lots of disparate databases, and therefore this data is kind of lurking in lots of different areas inside the business. And so then it becomes a challenge to how can I extract it? Because the definitions of that data is different because it's in different technologies and different structures. So to that end, I think certainly in helping to kind of open up this resource, getting to a kind of a more streamlined software-based, like all-in-one type technology will certainly help to expose some of these opportunities. But a great sort of foundation really for some of the thinking that we have. Put that side by side with dimension data, where they're saying the number one trend in the next 5 years is analytics-driven personalization. So here we have this notion of how can I get very, very intimate with my target, with my customer, and with that personalization, how can I actually change what I'm doing to be meaningful for that customer? And we've seen the examples that Nicola mentioned, and some of the brands that we all know and love or hate are very much active in this area. But that personalization is going to become very, very key for us. And certainly, the only way we can access this 73% is to get busy with good analytics tools. And then finally, Gartner suggests that 40% of enterprises net new investment in business intelligence, BI, will be predictive analytics by 2020. So, just 2 years away. But from that perspective, being able to understand what my customer is about to do next. Is this the customer about to switch, for example? It could be very important to me. Is this a customer that's very suitable for my new products, or not, as the case may be? So in that sense, these are the kind of foundations behind the kind of thoughts that we sort of sent off earlier. And we mentioned the kind of multi-channel kind of came up in the chat room. Your customers have gone multi-channel already. Really, that's the point I'm making here. They have their smartphones. The smartphones give them access to the multiple ways of contacting you: phone, chat, email, any messaging platform you choose. Whether we like it or not, the customers, we as consumers, are omni-channel in our behaviors. Have you, as the brand, actually responded to that? And have you got the sort of processes, technology, people in place to actually respond to that? And the question we would ask is, why haven't you? And often the reason why haven't you is because it's very, very complex, because there's lots and lots of disparate technologies. Remember I said about a separate tool for chat and a separate tool for email. It's very, very difficult to get those things to kind of work sensibly together. So at Genesis, we've been kind of busy making things what we believe to be easier. And I'm showing you an example here really of what we call like the customer journey. That's how we've defined it. And it's just an example here with, if you can see my pointer, this customer is called George customer. Thanks, guys, in the dev side for putting a really good example there. But we've got a nice screen pop. He's called into the contact center. We've got some information about him. We're kind of helping him with some questions that he may have. But the point I want to show you is the bottom right. We have this sort of profile verified. And what I'm saying here is that in my database, inside the contact center application, not the CRM application, I know that I've seen George customer before. And I'm actually creating a little profile for the customer in my contact center application. Again, not the CRM application. It could be as well. Like that's always an option. But what we're sort of seeing is it's kind of better, and it kind of helps deliver omni-channel better if I actually have that data on board. So to that end, I'm starting now to build a kind of this breadcrumb trail I keep talking about occasionally, where how does the customer touch my brand, and am I actually remembering that, and who should remember that? And before we kind of thought, well, maybe CRM is the best place to remember that. But actually, to make that practical, it's quite a lot of heavy lifting and quite a lot of customizing. Whereas for us, we're kind of carrying the actual transactions. So therefore, we feel we're the kind of best people to kind of keep that breadcrumb trail. So to that end, the kind of example I'm showing you next here is all the interactions that we've had recently from George customer. And we have calls and a variety of calls, and we have chats as well, as you can see in this example. So you can kind of see that from the omni-channel journey, from knowing where he's been, knowing what he's touched. I'm now sort of more empowered and more, if you like, aware, if you like, of the customer. If I need to jump into any conversations because of a complaint, I can do that easily. And the last one really is if I need to jump into a chat or an email, I can pull up the actual text from conversations that we've had before. So I suppose the modern sort of contact center tools, yes, they're often cloud-based, but what they also are, if you like, are consolidated. So instead of disparate platforms, they're kind of one single platform designed for a purpose. And really that purpose is to kind of make it sort of more comfortable for the customer to interact, make it more comfortable for the business to respond to those customers' needs, and kind of have the information that they need readily at hand. And you know, we kind of talk about these disparate systems, and if you look at the screen here and all the kind of topics that we talk about, you know, how many in your contact center, like a question to the audience, really in your contact center, how many separate systems are you actually using today to run your contact center? You know, thinking about quality, recording, chat, email, web. You know, often and more than likely, these are separate tools, and it becomes really, really difficult for us to access the rich information, the important information, when you're operating on separate tools. Really try and think about, you know, leveraging, you know, cloud is really cool because it is all in one, and it is, if you like, commercially accessible, but also very technically accessible. So a cloud application can be deployed very, very quickly. So I'd really urge the audience to think about that. Certainly to kind of get away from lots and lots of disparate pieces, because they become challenges, if you like, in the longer term.
That would be a good question for the chat room. How many systems do you use to access customer, you know, or do you use in a customer interaction in your contact center? If you just like to, and perhaps share some of the challenges you have with all that information.
Thank you, George. That's a good idea. I'll be interested in the feedback. So when we kind of put the context back to our consumer, you know, what about our consumer? So you know, this lady is not tech savvy, but she does use her fingerprint to authenticate, you know, through her mobile device. She uses video to communicate with her doctor. She uses WhatsApp to chat with her colleagues and to her friends. Heart rate monitor when she works out, and she also uses the Amazon Echo to help her boil an egg. So from that perspective, she's not tech savvy, but she's using a lot of tech, and that's really cool.
I didn't know you could lift the leg up and put an egg inside.
I don't think so. I'm curious, but I think it makes the point, and from that perspective, you know, even stronger, this lady is very willfully exposing personal data with the quid pro quo that I'll give you this information, guys, if you give me better offers or lower prices or that hyper-personalized service. And you know, thinking back to the dimension data point about, you know, the hyper-personalization, we're kind of seeing this again. And, you know, we have to kind of think about, I know a lot of information about my customer. How can I make sure I'm giving the right kind of experience back to that customer that's appropriate? If my opportunity with this customer is a very small amount, then let's not be sort of annoying. But if my opportunity is quite large, I need to be kind of on that as an opportunity to sort of pursue it. And then, as you can imagine, we have a volume of data, and this is kind of where we start to kind of come into parallel with Nicola's ideas, really. Genesis is very much thinking about how we can handle this volume of information. And because we have this volume of data, volume of contacts, really we can't just staff up our contact centers to support that. It just doesn't make sense. And so we start to bring in the automation tools like have been suggested so far. And I'm not necessarily going to touch on all of these, but the point is, bringing an application into the contact center, which is a combination of, if you look at the third bullet there, it's a combination of bots, it's a combination of adaptive learning, automated services, artificial or augmented intelligence. I kind of get the point, Nicola, and I kind of agree. You know, data and guided experience. So we're kind of looking here at like a toolkit, and Genesis is calling that toolkit Kate. So expect to see and hear a lot about Kate in the months and years ahead. But the idea here is that we're actually assisting and empowering the customers, and we're also assisting and empowering the agents, and also assisting and empowering the managers. So being able to deploy and use this technology becomes very, very valuable, and will help us with the heavy volume of, if you like, normal stuff, simple stuff, and then we can get focused with the humans on the complex stuff as per all the statistics and expectations from the experts. And if you look at the last point, really, just sort of shows that some of the case studies we've worked on. So, you know, we don't anticipate sort of being the answer, but we have to kind of collaborate. And here we have a great example where we're working with Watson, we're working with Creative Virtual and with AI. And with these kind of combinations of tools, together we're kind of delivering those better experiences. So it is kind of that. There is no simple single answer to the question. It's kind of a teamwork. And Genesis really has this notion, if you like, of blended AI. So blended AI is, I am the agent, I have my role, I have AI, it has its role, but together we're working as blended AI. And that's I think is quite a nice way to look at the topic, really. Excuse me. So going back really then to our consumer, here's our queen. You know, think about the fact that, you know, with all that sort of information and all that opportunity, you know, customer experience can be magnificent. And think about those moments when you've had a great customer experience and the feeling you've had from that, and try and sort of replicate that for your customers. Create the experience she deserves, empower the employees to help, guide, and wow her. Think about that. Are you wowing your customers every day? You know, that's kind of something that's interesting, and I like that one. Treat her like she's number one, which obviously we should, but you know, we really have to try and deliver that. Reach those predictable outcomes and be smart, be adaptive, and be creative and imaginative. You know, what's different? How can you be different from your competitors? And with that, we believe, and I like that magnificent comment, CX can be magnificent. Let's drive and make it magnificent. So there are my remarks, John T.
Thank you very much for that, Mike. I think there's a lot of food for thought in there, and it'd be interesting to meet Kate as we go forward. So I think we'll be fabulous. So there's some quite interesting tips and opinions coming through now. Craig has said, in my experience, call center data is used for call center purposes, and it's completely untapped of hugely valuable information for the rest of the business. And I think there's marketing often, have a challenging relationship with the contact center. But the contact center can be a real big source of insight for the rest of the business. I see Nicola there is nodding very much on that.
I think contact centers are an interesting point now. So if we actually start to use our analytics better, we are becoming a strategic resource for the rest of the organization. Now, that doesn't require your senior managers to realize that. And I think partially that's us trying to sell upwards the value of some of this stuff. But absolutely, I keep saying if people from a portfolio team, for example, they like commissioning market research about what customers think about their products, but they forget that there's a contact center talking to customers about their products every day. And I think a lot of smart organizations now are very much using that intelligence with their portfolio teams and their service teams to say, this is a problem. How do we solve this problem rather than simply just count the calls? So yeah, absolutely. I think we've got quite an opportunity.
And here's an interesting question from Samir. It says, we have bots interacting with users in the first place before they connect through to an analyst. However, the customer satisfaction has only been 30% with the bots providing self-help. Most of the users like to interact with humans, so how are bots going to bridge these? Nicola, do you see this as bots not necessarily front-ending, but bots helping the advisor?
Oh, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think customer satisfaction is a funny thing sometimes. We have the same with IVR. If you've got bad IVR, customer sat tends to go down because it directs you to the wrong person. Actually, I think that's why I said earlier we're almost in the honeymoon period that we had in the initial sort of stages of IVR. It looks like a really promising technology for customer experience, but unless it's designed well, and that's why I said actually sometimes we do need to make sure that we can triage the customer. If the bot can get the customer to the right place, to the right answer, brilliant. But I think the real imperative then is to skills-based route it from what the customer's been saying in the conversation with the bot to the right agent, and have that agent access that data so the customer doesn't need to repeat themselves.
If your website only has, say, 100 frequently asked questions, and you put a bot in front of those, that's not a lot of questions.
Correct. That's 100 answers.
I guess it's going to be a combination of how much of that deep learning have you been able to put into it.
That's right.
And also the handoff to a person when it starts to get a little bit beyond the bot.
And I think as well, be careful with your ambition for the technology. Don't feel it's going to answer the whole question. Maybe part of the question is its role. And from that perspective, try and break it down really. And in that sense, often these things are kind of felt that this is the answer, but actually it's a piece of the answer, and it just has to be kind of built in a sensible way with the rest of the team, the humans, and the operation. So
I guess it all comes down to why did you put the bot on in the first place? If you did it to save money, then the customer's probably not going to be doing it. If you provide it to say we're closed, but as a bot, let's see if we can help you, you're then at least providing some benefit, and you're actually saying you're a bot rather than pretending to be a human.
Yes, it is.
has limited skills. So yeah, if anyone in the audience has got any thoughts on that, we'd like to share them. Here's a tip from Craig, who says bots and chat are all about agent efficiency and customer flexibility. Allows agents to handle more than one session simultaneously without the same real-time challenges of being on the phone. For instance, customers can connect, dip in and dip out in the background rather than occupying all of the time. So I guess there's a degree of concurrency there. Interesting question also from Samir. I handle a web queue, and it's always challenging to get that wow factor from customers. Any thoughts about how to do the wow effect on web chat, Mike?
Yeah, so it's very, very simple, but it's a hard thing to do. So personalization, really. So in that sense, you understand who your customer is, what their question is, and then try and associate it with something you already know about the customer to kind of give that kind of wow factor. Like, you've thought about me, you've made me feel special today, and in that context, I think that's really what it's like the unexpected surprise of how easy that was. And that's how I think bring a personal effect into it, Samir. That's my thought. Nicola, what
I think it's a key point, because as you're putting a lot more into self-service and automation, actually the last thing you want are your agents to become robots. So I think you're absolutely right. It is all about using the agent's personality and their empathy and all of those lovely things that we naturally have within chat, rather than giving them a standard set of responses. Now they can, I think, a lot of the work that I've seen is there are a standard set of responses within chat that you can cut and paste, but a lot of the agents actually personalize them as well. So they don't sound like a robot, but they're not.
Yeah. So personalization, one of the key ones. Peter makes a very interesting point. You need to be completely honest with your customers on whether they're speaking with a bot or an agent, because people will always be able to tell the difference. But most people will accept the bot if it's effective and efficient. Right. Never have bots or AI pretending to be a person. And I wonder if that, Nicola, I guess that's the Turing test, and it hasn't been.
Absolutely. I've just done a blog on this actually around should you pretend that it's a human, because it doesn't have the capabilities of a human. And actually, bots can be customers can be quite rude to bots. So I think the other question is, you might have the bot doing the triage, but if you then transfer down to a human agent, you also need to make it clear to the customer that this is now a human agent, because they could just continue being rude to them.
Yeah, I think that's very important.
That transparency is really, really key.
Leslie says, I've seen accounts who have 15 to 20 different systems, legacy web-based CRMs, sometimes even 2 CRMs, one for the customer pool, another for grandfathered accounts, Excel and Word files. Attempt to centralize all systems takes a long time and could potentially result in even more systems being used than reduced. I do remember one day recently where I saw one presentation saying, oh, when we've got a legacy system, it's called Siebel. And I remember going to lectures 10 years ago where Siebel was the one system that would replace all the legacy systems rather than being another one. And
don't forget mergers and acquisitions, Jonty. So from that perspective, what works today in my system for my customers, I've now acquired, and suddenly we have 2 systems, 3 systems, 7 systems, and very hard to get those amalgamated into one. So.
Well, we've got a quick question from Riaz. We haven't got time to answer that, but if anyone hasn't answered this, we'll deal with it in the chat room. We've reached the top of the hour, and if you could give us our extra bit of data, this will be looked at by a real human, me, rather than by our survey bot. Also, if you'd like a demonstration of the Genesys Intelligent Agent or any other Genesys solutions such as Genesys Kate, if you'd like to tick that in the post-webinar box, I'm sure Mike can arrange a demonstration for you. The replay will be available later on in about an hour's time, callcenterhelper.com recorded webinars. Today's winning tip comes from Leslie, and Leslie says, when considering self-service technology, think of the customer contact interactions as valuable versus irritants. If the task is valuable to the customer and to you, then make sure you resource it. If it's an irritant to the customer and valuable to you, but if it's an irritant to both the customer and you, then you need to eliminate it.
Very good, Leslie. Well done.
Very important. And I think, look at the role of robots in that. So just like to thank our two speakers. Nicola, it's been, as ever, lovely to have you on the call. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Mike from Genesis, great to be across with you and on another webinar. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time, where we're going to be looking at easy ways to improve customer satisfaction. So just remember to fill in the survey before you leave. And thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you then.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.